Today I'm going to show you guys how to style an insanely delicious product photo, so let's get right into it. So let's just dive right on in. We're gonna be styling this jar of almond butter today. And what I really want to do with this image is we're gonna be styling a flat lay here. I want to spread out the almond butter so that we can really showcase the texture of the product. And then we're gonna lay the jar on top of it so that you can see not only what the product inside looks like, but we also really wanna showcase this beautiful packaging. So the first thing that I wanna do for a shot like this to reduce cleanup time is we're gonna lay down a sheet of parchment paper here. And I'm just gonna tape down the edges to keep it nice and secure, because once we start spreading the almond butter, things are gonna get a little bit dicey. So as always, I'm tethering to my computer here so that I can see what's going on. And so the first thing that I like to do for a shot like this is to just spread a little bit of the product right in the center. And that way I have something that I can set my focus point on, so that as I'm working, I can kind of see how everything is coming together and smooth things over the way I would like. So we've got our focus point set, and then I just kind of like to bring my fingers in from around the edges just to see how far I need to spread the almond butter. I don't have quite enough to go all the way across this piece of paper, so that just gives me a general idea of how much I'm gonna need. So I really am just gonna dump out most of this, because I do want it to be a nice thick layer of just creamy swirls of almond butter. That should be enough to start, and so now we'll just begin just gently spreading this around until it fills the frame completely. All right, so this is what our almond butter is looking like as it stands right now. So the next thing that we want to do is modify our lighting so that we can make this look a little bit more enticing. I think right now the way the light is falling on it, it's just looking kind of flat. I have it coming directly from the side of the subject here. So let's see if we can move this around a little bit and see if we can get more contrast between those darks and the lights and just get a really nice sheen across some of those swirls. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of be watching on my screen here to see what the almond butter is looking like as I make some adjustments to my light. The first thing I want to do is let's just crank the light and angle it downward a bit, because right now it's facing the ceiling and that's not really doing a whole lot for us. And already you can see that has given the image so much more definition. It looks way more delicious. And so now it's just a matter of what angle do we want the light to be coming from. So let's try to move it over here. And what I'm really looking out for right now is how I can make some of those highlights across the surface of the almond butter really just pop. And it looks like no matter what angle we're coming from, it brings out that nice sheen. So from here, it's really just a matter of personal preference and what looks really good to you. But for something like this, I would just recommend take a few shots, compare each of the different angles of lighting, and then go with whichever one you think looks best. And so another thing that we can try here is just raising and lowering our light. So let's see, when we raise it up high, that kind of gets rid of some of the shadows. There's more light washing across the surface of the almond butter. So I think we definitely want to go with a lower light, and look at how that comes alive. That looks, wow, that looks really delicious. So let's just kind of play around with this angle a little bit more. You can see it gets really flat and just kind of dull looking when I crank it up, and then when I lower it back down, that's when it really comes to life again. We can try pointing the light toward different directions, and I think this is actually looking really good right here. So let's just stick with this, and then I'm just gonna move this around a little bit more just to make sure we've got something that looks good. And yeah, I think I'm really happy with how this is looking. There's probably a dozen different ways that you could make this work, but let's just stick with this for now, because the lower light is working really well, and I like this kind of front diagonal angle that we have. So now that we're happy with our lighting position here, we can get into actually styling the image. One thing that I do want to do is I'm gonna take just a smaller piece of parchment paper here and just tape it across the back of our jar here that's going to actually be laying in the almond butter. Not only is this gonna protect the label in case we need to use this for another shoot, but it's also just gonna make the cleanup process a whole lot easier. So before we lay our product down, now what I want to do, now that we have our lighting positioned, what we can do is get these swirls within the almond butter exactly as we want them. I didn't want to perfect it and then start moving the light around and allow it to settle. So now we're at a good place where I'm just going to kind of play with this until everything looks good. I'm not going to be too concerned with how the swirls in the very center look because obviously that's where our jar is going to be, but really just focusing around the edges here, trying to make it look nice and appealing, and then we'll be ready to lay our jar down right there in the middle. So let's just, before we actually place it, I'm just gonna kind of hover here and see how things are looking. And what I'm actually noticing is that there's not a whole lot of space between the top and the bottom. So I'm just gonna crank this a bit. The camera's just too close to our scene. So we're gonna give this a little more space. Get our camera nice and level again, and let's refocus on that almond butter. And then of course, when we do that, we've got some blank edges that we need to fill around. So I'm just gonna add a little more so that we can close in those edges. Okay, so now before we perfect our swirls again, to just save some time, let's just go ahead and place this, make sure we're happier with how much space we have. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So let's just go through, make those swirls look really nice again, and then we'll be ready to place our product. One thing you'll want to note as you're going through this process is which direction, when you sweep these swirls around, which direction gives them the most definition based on where the light is coming from. And that's what's really going to help this really pop off the screen. So I'm kind of going in a counterclockwise motion for most of my swirls. We do want some variation within them, but overall, I think what's going to be easier now is if we just go ahead and place the product so that I can see how these edges are going to look, and then we can kind of modify it if we need to. So I'm just going to place this right in the center of our frame. And I'm just pressing it in there really gently. Most of that is covered by the parchment paper, thankfully. And then we'll reset our focus to the jar now. Ooh, and that is just looking delicious. So now I've got the almond butter swirled and it just looks really delicious. It's exactly how I want it. So it's at this point that you want to go ahead and take a shot, because we have one more thing that we want to do, but we want to make sure that we can go back in later and composite these perfect swirls if they do settle a little bit after we take this last step. But the next thing that we want to do is I want to incorporate some, real life almonds into the mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place some of these just around the almond butter just to make it really obvious when the viewer sees this image for the first time. If they're scrolling through, it's just really obvious what this product represents. So I'm going to place some whole almonds around, and then I'm actually going to crush a few of these too, just to sprinkle some more throughout and add a little bit of texture. So let's just place a few of these in here. I think maybe 4 or 5 almonds should do it. And then I'm just going to take this mug here and we're just going to crush them so that we have some nice variation in the size of chunks that we have. I want some finer ones, and then I want some bigger chunks. I don't know if you can see this, but like so. So I think I want to start by placing the whole almonds first, and then we can kind of go throughout and add the crushed pieces just as a little bit of an accent. So I'm just going to kind of start to place these. I want some of them to be facing different directions than the others. Some of them I'm going to place close together. We'll layer a couple two right up next to each other. Others, maybe they'll just be coming in from the edge of the frame where you can't see the entire thing. But again, just add some variation throughout this process, and you can't really go wrong. And you can always move and adjust if you need to. But something like this, I really like this style of image because no matter what you do, it's going to look really delicious. So I'm just going to take a test shot here and see how we're coming along, how the almonds are looking. And it looks like we could use some maybe over in this area. This corner is looking a little sad with the shadows. Maybe I'll cluster about 3 of them together here. I'm just kind of randomly spacing them throughout. Okay, so now we're ready to add in the crushed pieces. I don't want to get too crazy with these. And something like this, I'm going to kind of try to place them in a way that makes sense. I don't just want to randomly sprinkle them, but we're just going to start maybe with adding them around some almonds that I've already placed. And then we'll just sprinkle a little bit in between some of them, just so that there's a bit of structure to this and it doesn't come off as random. So we do still want our styling to look very intentional. And maybe we'll place some of these larger broken pieces just next to the whole almonds, and then I'll go through and add just a little sprinkle next to that of the crushed pieces. And you know what else we can do? I'm even gonna sprinkle some of these finer crumbs right on top of some of the almonds. This side is just looking particularly dark and dramatic, so I do want to grab a version where I'm using this bounce card just to bounce some of the light coming from over there back onto this side of the jar, because it's just looking a little bit dark. So let's grab a shot of that. Yeah, we're looking good. This is looking pretty good. All right, guys, real quick, take a look at this image. This is how things are looking as it stands right now. And there's one thing you might notice, and it's just that the almonds around the jar aren't quite in sharp focus, and I really want them to be. There's no reason for them to be blurry or out of focus for an image like this. So I do have my f-stop set at f8, but I think we need to take that further. So I'm gonna adjust my camera settings, come back, take another shot, and we'll see what settings really bring those almonds into focus. All right, now this image is exactly what we want. So this is, again, the benefit of shooting on a C-stand or a tripod, because you can really slow down that shutter speed and bring that f-stop to whatever it needs to be to bring every element into focus. So now our camera settings are at 1/20th of a second, which is a really slow shutter speed. F16 is what brought those almonds into focus, and then ISO is at 500. So here's the final image for this one after some edits, and this is just another great concept that you guys can keep in your tool belt, especially if you're photographing an entire product line where you really want to showcase the flavor of each product in the collection. So play around with this a little bit. If you guys try it out, tag me on Instagram because I love seeing what you're creating, and I'll see you guys next time.